Ladies. Today I'd like to talk to you about intellectual contagions. So, if you've ever watched Dan Carlin, and if you'd like a premiere on this topic, I'd recommend you start with his show about Jan van Leyden in the city of Munster, Germany, in the 15th century. But I was watching the start of his Supernova in the East series, and he started espousing more on this topic. If you really watch the first 30 minutes of the first episode, you'll get a good feel of what I'm talking about. But he talks about how civilizations have these cultural traits as influenced by their environment, and then as their history goes on, those traits get strengthened and weakened. And under certain conditions, people can have their psychological biases tickled, and they could be prone to act in ways that don't make sense for certain cultural reasons. So, Jan van Leyden in Munster, famous Anabaptist, big time cult leader like David Koresh, he really did play on the psychological biases of the poor and the middle class who wanted religious freedom and wanted economic equality until eventually he became a cult leader, and people who were really peaceful and kind like a year ago were suddenly doing the most depraved, murderous things that you could imagine just because, of that cult mentality. Well, if you have the samurai for hundreds of years in Japan, and Japan becomes convinced that its culture is about to be stamped out in World War II, you have the common everyday soldier like ready to fight to the death, and you have Hondo Onoda not surrendering until the 1970s. Got dropped off on an island. People kept trying to tell him that the war was over, and for the life of him, he just he kept having faith that World War II was going on, because he's like, how could Japan still be around if we lost the war? Everybody should be dead. We fight on to the last person. 100 million souls for Japan and all that. Well, I'm beginning to wonder if this Trump supporter stuff is something of an intellectual contagion, if it's not a psychological disorder as the DSM or other bodies would have. It's more of a sociological disease. It's as if a meme, as opposed to a virus, were to infect millions of our people who are more prone to racism, people whose egos were weakened, people who really identified with the state in a lot of cases. And, Trump came in and said, we'll make you the true elites over the cultural ones that you don't really respect. And they fell for it hook, line, and sinker until eventually people who were perfectly civil in 2012, even if they had strange ideas about how things worked and, weren't likely to get involved themselves, completely batshit crazy just because, that faith makes them feel better about themselves. It's the intellectual drug that sustains them, and cutting them off from that in a lot of ways, cutting them off from copium, is going to be like cutting an addict off their heroin supply. So I don't know how we can build a cordon sanitaire around the uninfected Americans. I don't know if there's any vaccine at this point that would work. We've been trying to focus more on public education in America over the past 30 years, but it appears it hasn't worked. If anything, the more access to information you give Americans, the more prone to these flights of fancy they become, to the point where I wonder if it's not so much ignorance as it is a lack of intellectual discipline per se. I don't know what to do about this, but the people are getting sicker.